The 1983 famine in Ghana stands as one of the darkest moments in the country's post-independence history. A combination of natural disasters, economic mismanagement, and political instability plunged Ghana into a crisis that tested the resilience of its people. However, this famine was not just a story of suffering, it also marked a turning point in Ghana's history, reshaping its political and economic landscape. Ghana, once hailed as the Black Star of Africa after gaining independence from Britain in 1957, entered a period of political turmoil in the years following its independence. By the early 1980s, the country had experienced multiple coups and changes in leadership, each bringing new policies that failed to stabilize the economy. The military government of Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings came to power in December 1981 after overthrowing the civilian government. Rawlings, who had led a previous coup in 1979, returned with a promise of reform and social justice. However, the country's economy was in tatters. Inflation was rampant, essential goods were scarce, and the black market thrived under weak regulation. The situation worsened with the government's heavy-handed attempts to control prices and curb smuggling, which only led to more economic dysfunction. This fragile economic situation set the stage for what was to come. When nature dealt its cruel blow in 1983, the nation was already on its knees, and the famine would push it further into despair. In 1983, Ghana experienced one of the most severe droughts in its history. Rainfall levels dropped dramatically, leading to a widespread crop failure across the country. Agriculture, which was the backbone of the Ghanaian economy, suffered immensely. Cocoa, Ghana's chief export and primary foreign exchange earner, was hit hard, leaving the country with little to trade internationally. Farmers watched helplessly as their crops withered in the fields, unable to produce the yields that had sustained communities for generations. The drought also exacerbated an already fragile food security situation. Ghana, like many African nations, depended on seasonal rains to grow staple crops like maize, millet, and yam. With the rains failing, local food supplies dwindled. Rural areas, particularly in the northern and central regions, were hardest hit as subsistence farmers struggled to feed their families. As if the drought wasn't enough, bushfires spread across vast stretches of the country, devastating whatever crops remained. These fires, fueled by dry winds and parched vegetation, were the result of both natural and human factors. In rural areas, slash and burn farming methods used to clear land for planting spiraled out of control due to the drought. Entire farms were lost to the flames, compounding the already dire food shortage. The 1983 famine had a catastrophic impact on the lives of Ghanaians. As food became increasingly scarce, prices for basic commodities skyrocketed, making it nearly impossible for ordinary citizens to afford what little was available. Bread, maize, rice, and other staples became luxury items, and long lines formed outside markets in hopes of securing small rations. In the rural areas, the situation was even more desperate. Entire families subsisted on wild fruits and roots, while others went days without food. Children, the elderly, and sick were particularly vulnerable, and cases of severe malnutrition were reported across the country. Many children developed kwashiorkor, a form of malnutrition characterized by swollen bellies, lethargy, and stunted growth. The sight of bloated, malnourished children became a tragic symbol of the suffering that gripped Ghana during the famine. In urban centers like Accra and Kumasi, the situation was no better. Migrants from the rural areas flooded the cities seeking food and shelter, which only added to the strain on the limited resources. As the famine worsened, crime rates surged. Desperate individuals resorted to theft and violence to survive. The government's food distribution programs, while helpful in some areas, were insufficient to meet the overwhelming demand. As conditions in Ghana deteriorated, tens of thousands of Ghanaians fled the country, seeking refuge and better opportunities in neighboring West African nations like Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo. However, this mass exodus led to a new set of challenges. The Nigerian government, facing its own economic difficulties, began expelling foreign workers, many of whom were Ghanaians. In 1983, over 1 million Ghanaians were deported from Nigeria, arriving back in Ghana with little more than the clothes on their backs. This influx of returnees exacerbated the already critical food shortage as the country struggled to absorb the sudden population increase. The international community responded to the famine with a combination of food aid and relief efforts. The World Food Programme, the United Nations, and various non-governmental organizations provided food shipments and financial assistance to help alleviate the worst of the crisis. However, logistical challenges, corruption, and mismanagement of aid distribution limited the impact of these interventions. Amidst the chaos, Jerry Rawlings and his Provisional National Defense Council faced immense pressure to stabilize the country. Rawlings, a charismatic yet controversial figure, adopted a populist stance that resonated with many Ghanaians, especially the poor and disenfranchised. His government cracked down on corruption, imposed strict economic controls, and attempted to root out profiteering in the markets. However, these measures did little to address the underlying causes of the famine. By 1983, it became clear that Ghana could not continue on its current path. Rawlings recognized the need for significant economic reform and turned to the international financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank for assistance. Although initially hesitant, Rawlings agreed to implement the structural adjustment programs, which required the government to cut subsidies, liberalize trade, and reduce public spending in exchange for financial aid. These reforms were deeply unpopular among Ghanaians as they led to an increase in the cost of living and further hardships in the short term. However, they also marked the beginning of a gradual economic recovery that would reshape Ghana's future. By opening up the economy, encouraging private enterprise, and attracting foreign investment, Ghana slowly emerged from the famine and began to rebuild. The 1983 famine left an indelible mark on Ghana. For many who lived through it, the famine was a time of unimaginable hardship, where survival was uncertain and hope was fleeting. It exposed the fragility of Ghana's agricultural sector and highlighted the dangers of over-reliance on rain-fed farming. The famine also underscored the need for sound economic policies and better governance to protect the nation from future crises.